Welcome, everyone, to the captive audience. It is the 3rd of March. Is it the Ides of March? I don't know. But in Oregon, we always have an interesting time at this time of year because this is when the state legislature goes and swings into action, passing all kinds of bills that are super crazy or having hearings on them and having very few hearings on bills that aren't crazy, which is the other downside of what we're experiencing. I'm Kevin Hoare, and I'm glad to be on with you tonight. I had a little bit of a technical issue here and had to relaunch the old computer, but I'm glad to be able to share with you some very, very good news. It's good news because Oregon is one of the states that's heavily resource intense. We really rely on timber and our ability to leverage that both for harvesting and the revenues that come from that, but also for processing in timber mills and turning into wood products that are well known the world over. And a very good development happened over this weekend that I want to share with you. Hi, Lori. Thanks for being with me here. First, a development. President Trump has issued an executive order that is going to unleash across the whole country the timber industry. And this executive order is meant to boost U.S. lumber and U.S. timber industries. Right now, we're heavily reliant, especially in Oregon, on importing timber for our housing, among other things, from places like Canada. And as you know, there are some trade conflicts with Canada. The Commerce Secretary has been directed to launch an investigation into possible harm done to national security by importing lumber, as opposed to being reliant on our own. Exporters like Canada, Germany, and Brazil have been dumping lumber into our markets, according to the executive order, at the expense of our economic prosperity and, frankly, our national security, to the extent that we rely upon timber for many, many things, including things that our military needs. Peter Navarro, who served as the trade secretary in the first Trump administration and is also involved in this administration, said he's a senior counselor, actually, to the president now in trade and manufacturing. And he said timber refers to the cutting and removal of trees, while lumber refers to the process of turning those trees into boards and building materials. He said that the executive order demands a whole of government operation relying on department and agency heads, including the Secretary of Interior, who oversees the Bureau of Land Management, as we know, the Secretary of Agriculture, the Director of the Bureau of Land Management, the Chief of the U.S. Forest Service, the Director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and, of course, the Commerce Secretary, through to Assistant Administrators for Fisheries, to propose ways to expedite production while also improving forest management in ways that are in compliance with existing legislation, such as the Endangered Species Act and the Tribal Forestry Protection Act. So all these things that are thrown up to stop us from being able to exploit our own timber resources are going to be considered. But at the same time, this is a very clear direction. And as we know, 60% of Oregon is federal controlled and managed land, either by the Forest Service or by the Bureau of Land Management. So 60% of Oregon is the federal government, and this order could directly impact that. Now, the agencies have several deadlines. They first guidance on is to increase timber production and sound forest management. It's due within 30 days to have guidance on doing that. And then the last is due in 280 days. So this is not let's hope one day this happens. All the relevant agencies shall eliminate to the maximum extent permissible by law all undue delays within their respective permitting processes related to timber production. He said that they should all take all necessary and appropriate steps consistent with applicable law to suspend, revise, or rescind all existing regulations, orders, guidance documents, policies, settlements, consent orders, and other agency actions that impose an undue burden on timber production. This is amazingly good news for Oregon. This is a state that's we are in across the world one of the most abundant. We have the greatest abundance of this resource. I was talking to somebody from California who said that he thought California had a lot of timber. It's a big state, but when he came to Oregon, he was like, it's more dense. There's a lot more of it. And he's like, Oregon is a place that we've got to make a difference in terms of getting forest management going. And as we know, forest management is meant to be key to reducing and mitigating the risks of wildfires. So this is a two-prong effort in terms of lumber and timber, but also wildfire production or wildfire risk reduction. Another White House official actually clarified that timber refers not just to cutting down new trees, but also to salvaging and clearing already fallen trees. This will not only reduce the cost of building materials, which Governor Kotek says she needs to build 35,000 homes in a year. Maybe President Trump will give her the only fighting chance she has at doing that. But it will also improve wildlife management. Don't forget, who's getting burned alive in these wildfires every year? Well, the spotted owl and the barred owl. And then they shoot the barred owl as well. Deer, squirrels, all the forest animals, bears, lions, they're all taking it hard with these wildfires. And it says also, as you're doing that on forest management, what you do is you wind up dramatically increasing the ability to prevent wildfires, which are tremendously destructive. At the same time that you dramatically improve habitat for fish and wildlife. And so they are going to make sure that they put into effect all of these items, and they strengthen the United States timber and lumber supply chain, which has been devastated and frankly attacked to the point that it was really, in some places in the country, on its last legs. And now we're going to turn it around. Now, they're also going to look at the impact of foreign government subsidies and predatory trade practices on the United States timber industry. And so, they said we've got some bad actors, some of whom are punitive allies. And they develop a massive overcapacity in their industry because the government has subsidized them. Then they dump the product in the United States. We end up losing some of our own companies. We've had 7 mills, I think, shut down last year. And that actually creates national security problems down the line. Timber and lumber, and I think really the industry that we should never be highly dependent on imports. And that's where we've ended up here. This official noted that U.S. dependency on imported timber has increased nearly 11-fold since the early 90s to the present day, and the industry itself could create 1 million jobs. In other words, prosperity could reign once again here in Oregon simply by being allowed to go and use our own resources. Naturally, the direct result of this is that we have people on the left losing their freaking minds. And I guess it's only the 18th thing in the last 20 days that they probably are losing their minds about. I don't blame them, because they should lose their minds for being this stupid. I'm trying to bring up the article here, and I apologize because I'm getting some kind of error, but let me post this there so that you can see it as well. Not the error, but hopefully the article. And let me go to the article. So apparently it's sparking some kind of backlash from the from the group called From Oregon Wild. Now, let me tell you something about how this breaks down. What I learned last year is that Oregon Wild is just one of the groups that's advancing this agenda of wilding. Wilding is what got us into the not managing our forests here in Oregon situation. Wilding means when fires happen, it's awesome because that's just the forest being the forest, and that's healthy for it. And oops, there's a bunch of people who have their homes burned and their timberland destroyed. Oh well, too bad for them. But Oregon Wild condemned the president's order and said that it'll threaten fish and wildlife habitats, threaten clean drinking water, and the health of forests. These are the people who have given us the current system, which has led to very unhealthy forests, period. You heard the order, and the description itself is going to consider and try to make sure that it improves fish and wildlife habitats. Clean drinking water, I think that these guys are grasping at straws. And of course, the guy who spoke up on behalf of Oregon Wild is an attorney. Why? Because what they do all day long is they file lawsuits to stop and gum up and prevent any usage of our forests. So now they're trying to blame the draining of California's reservoirs. This guy is trying to blame the draining of California's reservoirs and claiming that civil servants that are being fired are now is now reckless and ill-conceived. President Trump didn't drain California's reservoirs. The left did it. California did it to themselves. And President Trump made them actually turn the water back on so it could be used when it is in a reservoir, so they could do things like put out fires. These guys don't give a crap about whether or not fires will ever get put out. They only talk about it in so much that they can use it to beat up somebody and get some political advantage. But these guys are just total slime bags. I'm just going to say it right now, because they are the ones who have delivered this problem. And they claim that this is going to immediately target old growth forests. But then they participated in the effort in the Biden administration to change the definition of old growth to something that is frankly not old. And these people are no experts on protecting wildlife. Wildlife is being burned alive, the ground being scorched. And of course, they say they're all for carbon storage now. Well, there's a lot of carbon released in wildfires when you don't manage your forests. So anyway, these folks are screaming at the top of their lungs, and I think it's awesome because they deserve this. And this just shows that President Trump means what he says, not only for the U.S. economy, but frankly, in this case, for leveraging and exploiting our own natural resources while taking care of them, which is actually entirely possible to do. Of course, the World Economic Forum, do you remember them? Klaus Schwab, that Bond-like villain, they are more concerned about what they say is the climate crisis that they say is destroying North American forests and leading native forests to migrate north and lumber producers to move south. They say that policymakers like British Columbia are more interested in protecting old growth rather than using them. Really? That's interesting. We're getting a lot of our lumber from Canada. Now, these guys are just so full of crap. And they say that the idea that this is about wildfire prevention is a sham. They say Trump's orders about enriching timber corporations and deregulating the industry. Well, hell yes, it's about getting rid of the awful, terrible regulations. And you know what? This is about making sure that Americans, all the way through, the major companies, the small timber operators, the mills, the guys that work out in the forest, actually taking down the trees with the expertise to do it. And then the whole process of making sure that we replant and maintain and manage it. These guys are, um, Oregon Wild is absolutely livid. It's the state's oldest environmental nonprofit, by the way. And they say they're going to hold President Trump accountable. We're holding them accountable. It is time that they actually got what they deserved, which is they need to be held accountable for what they're doing to our state. Also, Oregon Democrats are losing their minds. They are trying to claim that that Doge and and the cutbacks in funding are going to produce an unprecedented wildfire season of failure this year. Well, I don't know how we top what they did. What we're going to make sure we do is actually fight fires and put them out, not send people in to watch them grow into a super wildfire and then spend weeks and months putting effort into pretending to put it out. It says here the federal government owns just over 50% of Oregon's land. I don't know if the word owns is right. They are entrusted under the ONC Act of 1937 with the management of it. I think Oregon ultimately should and must own Oregon. But, to people on the left and the Democrats, they have no idea what that means anymore. But they're already trying to claim that all of these cutbacks that are happening in the federal government are going to produce all these catastrophic results. This is where we have to actually correct the record and fight back. These guys don't know what they're talking about, and they never will actually know what they're talking about. Now, here's some good news on the timber front. Mass Timber Company breaks ground on a $117 million facility in Millersburg. It is a 190,000 square foot cross-laminated timber manufacturing facility in Millersburg. It's expected to produce 7 to 9 million square feet of mass timber products a year. It will create an estimated 75 jobs with an average wage of $80,000. It's expected to open in 2026, and it's Timber Lab is the owner, and they say it's going to be the largest facility. It's an engineered product. It's wood that's bound together to make it strong over a span for beams and walls, and it also allows wood to be used for structural purposes. They can build actually skyscrapers out of these things. There is a skyscraper that's being constructed or has been constructed in Portland entirely out of timber. And guess what? It's very resistant to earthquakes. Might be one of the few buildings left standing if there's a severe earthquake. If you've been to the Portland International Airport, mass timber is the kind of timber that you see on the ceiling of the airport there. It is an industry that we spawned here, that's growing, and has a great future and a great opportunity, not just within Oregon and across the country, but globally as an export business. And so, and it's the first of several of these that are expected to open. So, I really hope that this actually gets us where we need to go, because what's crazy is that the Democrats have destroyed industry after industry. Then they claim that doing anything to bring those industries back will bring utter catastrophe, when all they've brought us is utter catastrophe. So we know that they're liars, and we're going to do better. By the way, when it comes to firefighting, Oregon considers independent firefighting action on federal land. Now, I don't know if they're going to have to do this with President Trump actually being at the helm, but I know that this is actually a wise move. Oregon forestry officials could initiate firefighting on federal lands, even if it's not requested by the U.S. government under a bill that's raising liability concerns. It's a bipartisan bill, Senate Bill 432, and it's in response to delays of firefighting by federal officials, such as those that led to the 2020 Labor Day fires in Santiam Canyon. Fred Gerard, who actually lost his home in the fire, said those fires are allowed to burn for weeks, and they did very little to put those fires out, eventually allowing them to flare up to massive proportions, especially once the wind came along. The bill would require firefighters under contract with the Oregon Board of Forestry to develop firefighting strategies with the U.S. Forest Service before the wildfire season begins. If those plans do not adequately protect forest land when a blaze starts on forest land, contracted firefighters may enter the property to extinguish or control the fire to the extent allowable by federal law. I think you're going to find a lot of cooperation from President Trump in knocking down and fighting forest fires for all the reasons that we just talked about. The people who have made it sure that we can't do that are, of course, the Democrats. So, as Democrats complain about federal counterparts, other Democrats are complaining that their federal counterparts are doing too much to potentially manage forests and reduce the wildfire risk. I don't know. I think that this sounds like a promising move. I'm glad it's happening, but I don't think that the Democrats' heart is truly in it, especially if it means that they may have to be held accountable for all the stuff they failed to do over the years. Here's interesting news. Oregon Attorney General Dan Rayfield says he's going to host a town hall over DOJ federal firings and the funding freeze. And of course, he isn't involved with any of those firings or the funding freeze. He is a party on behalf of Oregon to a bunch of lawsuits they've tried to file claiming that President Trump actually isn't running the federal government and can't do this. They're claiming already that critical services are being disrupted. But of course, many states are rushing in to hire the people that are being in the force reductions of the federal government. States are going in and hiring these folks. Sounds to me like the states might take on more of this job. Wouldn't that be good? I mean, why not? That's actually part of the idea here, is that the federal government doesn't do a good job at a lot of this stuff, especially they're so far away. And we can do a better job here at home. So why don't we do it here? But the Democrats are really interested in protecting the federal government and the prerogatives that they thought, which is to forever run the federal government and have it be a large, bloated, and ever-growing bureaucracy. Voters are very happy to see what DOJ is doing and want to see these reductions. And the Democrats are basically foaming at the mouth, claiming that all these vital services can't be delivered. By the way, don't forget, across the federal government, there was somewhere in the teens, percentage-wise, of people actually working in person at the federal government. So these guys don't have a leg to stand on, because they're claiming that all these vital services aren't going to be delivered. And yet they had all these people who may or may not have been doing any work, sitting at home, collecting paychecks, working remotely, and not showing up to work ever. I think this is something that we're gonna find in the end is going to be a net benefit. But this is Dan Rayfield. He's posturing and virtue signaling. So is Senator Ron Wyden. He plans to skip President Trump's first speech to Congress of his term, and this is essentially a State of the Union speech, right? This is the State of the Union speech, and Wyden says he's going to skip it, and he's going to go hold an online town hall instead. And we know those town halls are all rigged. And in some cases, they actually have people that are being paid to show up at these town halls by Democrat Soros-funded operations. We've seen widespread reports about that. And so President Trump's going to lay out his legislative agenda before Congress. And apparently a legislator, Senator Wyden, has no interest in hearing it. So write him off as somebody who's going to solve any problems for the next 4 years. He's going to spend all of his time screaming and ranting and raving, claiming the sky is falling if we do anything to reduce the size of the government and to reduce fraud, waste, and abuse. That's what it is. Now, uh, Ron Wyden is probably heading for the barn here in the not too distant future. So I don't know what his swan song is going to be. He's claiming still that President Trump broke the law when he fired 17 inspectors general without some kind of warning. I don't know. We'll see what happens in court. But to be honest, if those inspector generals were supposed to be inspecting something and they were actually supposed to be protecting whistleblowers, we know whistleblowers were getting hammered during the Biden administration. And we also know that all the stuff we're finding with Doge existed during the Biden administration. It didn't just start on January 20th. So what the hell were they inspecting? So anyway, this is Wyden's 28th year as a U.S. Senator. I think it is time for him to say goodbye. And of course, he'll be replaced by some progressive leftist here in Oregon, most likely, but maybe not. They've got to be about solving problems too. And instead, he just wants to go and have rooms full of elderly progressives. That's what you mostly see in these town halls, ranting and raving about how they're going to lose their Social Security and Medicare, when in fact, when you cut fraud, waste, and abuse, is not Social Security benefits. They're not going to people who are supposed to receive them. They're going to people who are committing fraud, waste, and abuse. So actually, it means we'll have more money to ensure that Social Security benefits and Medicare are funded and can be delivered. So I think he's running around screaming his head off, claiming that all these things are happening. Actually, Pat, he did move to New York. He comes back and visits his subjects here in Oregon on occasion. But Ron Wyden lives in New York with his wife in Manhattan, actually, and has for over a decade. I remember in 2010. There was the whole move to expose that, and to some extent, it was exposed. But a lot of people are still unaware that Ron Wyden doesn't live in Oregon, and he doesn't have to. Apparently, it's not a requirement to run for Senate. Ron Wyden and Senator Jeff Merkley are, in fact, going to spend their time trying to advance a bill that's going to create the Permanent Office of Environmental Justice. I mean, when you talk about virtue signaling, this is probably the height of it. It's the dumbest thing I've heard in recent times. And to be honest, Wyden and Merkley, they must think that they're that Biden is still in office or that Harris won, because this is going nowhere. A senator for environmental justice makes about as much sense right now as a senator for trans justice. It's not going to happen in this administration, and they actually delivered a lot of what they call environmental justice in Oregon, which has given us expensive or unaffordable energy and wildfires. How's that sound? I think it's time to retire these folks and send them packing. What is happening here at the state level is Umatilla County is pushing for an opportunity to become a place that could host demonstration reactors for small modular nuclear energy reactors. This is if a majority of the county voters approve. It would allow them to become part of nuclear power development in the state. And as you know, Umatilla used to have the Boardman coal plant. The Democrats destroyed it with great fanfare. They detonated the smokestack and removed it. And the law originally said that it would be replaced by a natural gas turbine uh, energy generation facility. But then the Democrats changed the law and got rid of that. So it got replaced with nothing. And they've been running around putting up windmills and solar panels everywhere, which comes nowhere close to replacing what's being lost, especially in what they call baseload capacity, which means electricity that is provided continuously all the time, not just when the wind blows and the sun shines. And small modular reactors, we've talked about it on this show before, are frankly um, a, a sea change in terms of safety and technology. They're potent and effective, but they frankly can't melt down. Uh, and therefore, all of the concerns that have led to the original ban that was passed, Measure 7 in 1980 in Oregon on the heels of the 1979 Three Mile Island accident, have been addressed and negated. And so this is an opportunity to bring that forward. There are other, there are also other bills in the state legislature, which we will be talking about here in the coming weeks. Representative Ed Deal, Senator David Brock Smith are involved with those, and I think you're going to want to continue to pay attention to this space right here, because frankly, this is an opportunity that we desperately need here in Oregon. They say that it's clean energy, right? Because once they've addressed the issues of nuclear waste, which they have, and once they have addressed the safety concerns about the operations of the plant, it's pretty clean energy. So meeting clean energy goals that Oregon has set will only be met by introducing nuclear energy. Democrats probably figured that they'll just cut back on your use of electricity by forcing you into a smart grid and then requiring you to follow their edicts and have it rationed. That's how they roll. They don't fix things or make more of things. They make things cost more, produce less, and then ration it to their favorite constituents in the end. Here's another story that's really interesting and I want to put on your radar. There's an anti-discrimination bill that the legislature is considering that would harm both employers and employees. Oregon Business and Industry has come forward with a statement in opposition to it. They said that it would make several changes to age discrimination statutes, including the adoption of several factors as proxies for age. These include salary, length of employment, pension, and pension eligibility status. The bill would prohibit employers from asking job applicants for graduation dates or birth dates before completing an initial interview or making a job offer. Now, Oregon already has expansive protections against age-related discrimination, defined as any adverse action related to an age over 18. But this bill, using these proxies for age, would expose employers to liability for essential and quite normal hiring decisions that they make. The bill would force employers to make hiring decisions without adequate and relevant information. It would make it difficult for employers to navigate overlapping requirements within Oregon's pay equity law. Why does this matter? It would expand the risk for employers in order to discourage a form of discrimination that, to be clear, violates existing law. And in pursuing this redundant goal, the law would make it difficult for employers to adequately make informed hiring decisions. It would also create an added incentive to do something we're going to hear more about, which is invest outside of Oregon or leave. CNBC, which is owned by NBC, which is not exactly a friend of Republicans, but CNBC, the business channel, has deemed Oregon the third least business-friendly state in the United States. Oregon needs continued business investment to create jobs and generate tax revenue. But the Democrats think that's just going to come from magic, apparently. So take a look at this, because in a state where we've got issues, that's one of them. Another bill is House Bill 3362. It's a 4% tax on tires. And you might say, well, oh, they're going to spend that on fixing the roads. No, it's going to be used to pay for unrelated activities like rail transit, which is in a deep decline in terms of usage. It would pay for wildlife passages on roads. Apparently, they can't find any money in the $5 billion infrastructure package sent to Oregon to fund these activities. And this is in a state that already has the 10th highest gas tax. And now they're going to pass a sizable, and tires are expensive, as you know, a sizable tax on tires. And so, and they claim that it is taxing what they call tire pollution, and that it involves tire pollution prevention and mitigation. Does that sound familiar? I mean, these guys, they keep coming with more idiotic terms and more reasons to go and grab taxes. In fact, there are 3 taxes which are getting hearings right now by the Democrats. Number one is now there's a bill that actually proposes to cut the cat tax. It increases the exempt amount and the filing threshold for purposes of corporate activities tax. But then there's a bill, and there's a bill that also tries to apply this to home building contracts, and another bill that increases the exempt amount and the filing threshold for the purposes of corporate activities. And so there's testimony that you can give on those. There's the 4% tire tax we just talked about, and there's going to be a hearing on the flavor ban, which is the nicotine products flavor ban. So take a look at these bill hearings, but also, yeah, they never stop. The Democrats never stop, and now we're trying to scale it back. People are figuring this out, and in fact, there's a term that is referred to as a doom loop. There's a question being asked by KGW: why are people leaving Portland? And here are the 3 answers according to the study that's been done: taxes, the cost of housing, and the job market. Now, I think it's also fair to say that homelessness and crime factor into the standard of living that people had expected they would enjoy here in the Portland metro area, and don't feel like that exists anymore, and have sort of lost hope for it. We just talked about how it's the 3rd least business-friendly state in the country. Portland is probably the least business-friendly city in the state. So I think this 2025 State of the Economy report reveals some of these problems. And I'm not sure the Democrats are paying attention to this. What's ironic is Portland, for being such a liberal town, is the 2nd least diverse major city in the U.S. And the Wallet Hub, which has uncovered its rankings of Arlington, Texas, Houston, New York, Charlotte, North Carolina, and Los Angeles as the 5 large cities with the most diversity. It turns out that out of the 64 cities ranked in this, Portland is 63rd in their diversity score. So it's a super white city that loves diversity and spends a lot of money on it, and still, really, if they wanted more diversity, they would attract people to the city by making it a great place to live and a safe place to live, where they can get jobs and they can afford the taxes and they can afford the housing. Now, of course, there's income diversity too, and apparently that's a different story. Beaverton has the best ranking in the area in terms of income diversity. Corvallis, Medford, and Springfield all placed within the bottom half of 281 cities. And Portland is somewhere in the middle of the average, 17.6%. I don't exactly know what that percentage means, but yeah, for a city that spends all its time talking about and spending money on diversity, I think they're wasting their money. Speaking of wasting their money, Portland is now putting forward its budget. Actually, it's Multnomah County, their homeless services budget. They say that they're warning that a massive $104 million shortfall in the budget is expected. They don't mention anywhere in their discussion of this that there's a $34 million financial reserves dedicated to this. So they're saying that they're not willing to use the $34 million in reserves to make sure they can cover the cost of homelessness. Why? Because they actually want to make sure they want to get more money from the federal and state governments, and they want to see if they can't go and foist more taxes on the people of Multnomah County, as well as through Metro, which is that special tax that was passed. So I think you're going to find that they're going to lie, they're going to hide, they're going to continue to pay for the same things that have not been working and have seen the problem get worse. And then once they've done all that, they're going to go and try to raise taxes to pay for it. There you go. It is really the worst of politics, but it's also not surprising. Meanwhile, apparently dysentery, a diarrhea-inducing bacterial infection, is on the rise in Oregon. And this disgusting turn of events is ironically straight out of the Oregon Trail game. The diarrhea-inducing malady is making a stomach-churning comeback in a densely populated region of the state. I'll give you one guess as to which region or county this is taking place in. Please post online if you have an idea. Bong. All right. Time is up. I'm going to tell you who it is. I didn't see any guesses posted, but I'm sure yes, that's right, Kathy. Multnomah County. Apparently, there have been 40 cases of this sickness recently. And when you see the mess that people that drug addicted homeless are living in town, it is not really that surprising. Guess what it's spread through? Exposure to infected feces, contaminated food or water, or sexual contact, person to person. So, geez, do you think some of that might be happening in the drug addicted homeless community? Yes. And they say it right here. 56% of the recent cluster are believed to be among the homeless, with other cases linked to methamphetamine and opiate usage. Opiates, fentanyl. And then they go in and explain, when we don't have housing, it's harder to prevent infectious disease and harder to access care to treat disease compared if you are housed. They're saying it's just caused by housing. Apparently, pooping everywhere and doing the thing and doing drugs is caused by a lack of housing. And so the article starts out by telling the truth and ends it with a lie. Does that sound familiar? Now, the strain that's coming through is apparently resistant to various forms of antibiotics, which is troubling. And this severe strain apparently can kill people. So, yeah, dysentery. Why? Because standards are not being enforced upon a large section of our population is actually being encouraged and funded, given stuff to continue living this way as much as possible in Multnomah County. And they're running out of money to do it. Well, here's some interesting news that I'll share the last few stories about. Apparently, there was a move by some defense lawyers here in Oregon, the same folks that loved and passed Measure 110. The Oregon Criminal Defense Lawyers Association had a bill that they were trying to push through the State House Judiciary Committee that would allow judges to reduce many misdemeanors to violations at the time of sentencing for the purpose of decriminalizing the theft of basic need items, including food, water, medical supplies, tarps, and tents. You got it. It wasn't enough for us to spend all the money we're spending on it. Now, defense lawyers wanted to make it so that they could do as much theft as they want of any items falling into these categories. And I guess why not just steal instead of wait for somebody to come and give it to you? They wanted to make it a Class A violation, which is similar to a traffic ticket. Same thing they did with decriminalizing drugs. They turned that into a traffic ticket. Now, that's been slightly recriminalized, but I think it remains to be seen. These guys are claiming that, and the lobbyist claims, what's a good use of our resources? What about the 19-year-old who was just messing around, just being a young person and charged with a criminal trespass too? She's a young person with no criminal record. Criminal trespass 2 is a C misdemeanor. There was no damage and no one was harmed. Do we really need to charge this crime? Wait for the public defender to be appointed and drag this young person into court, disrupting their school or job? This doesn't really sound like the type of example that we're talking about here. This isn't a mischievous young person. We know that all the drug addicted homeless that are running around in town, they would love it if they steal as many tents, tarps, medical supplies of any kind. So all these, what do you call it? Drugstores that have stuff locked up behind glass cases or empty shelves. Food and water. They're going to walk into the grocery store and just steal a case of water, walk out. By the way, they pour out the water many times and then take the bottles, the plastic bottles, to the bottle machine, get money, and then use that to buy fentanyl. So that's a big problem. That's why they started moving the bottle deposit claim facilities away from certain areas where the homeless are congregating, because that apparently was a great way to finance that. Anyway, House Bill 2469 is technically dead, but it should have died before it ever got there. And the Northwest Grocery Retail Association opposed this vehemently. They said proving whether a person has created a significant risk of transmitting a communicable disease is a complex and costly endeavor. That was the Marion County Sheriff. But they opposed this. They said they did say it created a risk of spreading a communicable disease by not putting restrictions on this. But anyway, and they wanted to put this discretion in the hands of judges, which, as we've seen time and time again, love to let criminals out. Here is some good news. The Oregon Education Reform Act has been introduced by Senator David Brock Smith and Representative Warner Reschke. It is described by the two as an omnibus education bill to bring real reform to benefit students, teachers, and families across the state. We continue competing for last place across the nation, even though the legislature has continued to provide more funding than ever. As reported in the Oregonian, January 28, 2025, Oregon fourth graders who were tested in early 2024 ranked second worst in the country in math and tied with 10 other states for the third worst in reading. Wow. So we have a broken education system. Warner Reschke mentions that we need fundamental reform. Excellence in education is not an option. We must do better. And this is a step in the right direction. And it kind of summarizes all of the things that really would transform our education system into one that focuses on making sure that kids get educated, not coddled or um, spend time on complex social agendas that have nothing to do with reading, writing, and arithmetic. Uh, it would actually provide for security, allow school resource officers in every school district, so that there could also be safety at these schools and a focus on studying. Yeah, I was reading kindergarten too. I was too. See Joe Run. That was a book little books I read in kindergarten. Loved it. So this is a bill that's going to come forward and drive that debate, and let's hope that it gets a proper hearing. And if it doesn't, then some people are noticing that neighboring Idaho has passed a school choice tax credit. That's right. The big sucking sound that is Idaho, sucking people away from Oregon, Washington, and California, has just given another reason to move there to people. Parental choice tax credit will help parents pay for private school tuition, textbooks, transportation, other qualifying education expenses. The problem is universal, meaning any family can apply. No discrimination. Families earning up to 300% of the federal poverty level will receive priority for the credit. Students with disabilities will qualify for a higher tax credit of $7,500. So it's $5,000, could be more. 75. The program is capped at $50 million. And the governor signed the bill into law February 27th. 66% of Idaho registered voters favor this tax credit. The nonprofit policy organization Mountain States Policy Center notes that the tax credit does not take funding from public schools. The tax credit will empower parents to choose educational opportunities that best help their children succeed. And when parents have choices, students have more opportunities for their individual needs and goals, learning goals. Oregon should do this. But if they don't, people might just leave and go to Idaho. Now, last story here. I didn't even know this happened, but apparently Chip Terhune, who's used to work as a power broker on behalf of the public employee unions. He was appointed by Tina Kotek to be the CEO of the nonprofit workers' compensation insurer SAFE Corporation. Apparently, there was an attempt by somebody there was a shooting aimed at his house, and the governor's condemned it. We condemn it too. It's also illegal. And acts of violence shouldn't be directed at anybody. But I guess they only notice this type of thing when it's directed at state agency chiefs. So, but the Lake Oswego police are looking for tips, and there's some kind of vague picture of some guy with a gun and a black car. So I'll post this. I want everybody to be able to see that. And so I see, Laura, you're saying that there was some news out of DC here. I really didn't get much into the DC news today because I had been focusing so much on it. But you said that there's an education director that's been announced. I know that that there is an education secretary that has been appointed that's awaiting hearings, I believe. So we'll be hearing more about that. There are apparently 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexican imports that's going to take effect because they haven't done what they said they were going to do to help close up the border and stop the flow of fentanyl. So that's some news to pay attention to here. We all know what happened late last week between Zelensky and Trump. And I guess Zelensky needs some help figuring out just how badly he screwed up on behalf of his own country. Somebody must have put him up to it. I don't know how somebody could be that singularly stupid to go and get into a shouting match with the president in the Oval Office about aid that they're not entitled to and a peace process that they're not interested in. But we're going to find out a lot here in the coming days and weeks, because I do think that the people of Ukraine have a right to have a country that they can defend. But stopping the war and getting a ceasefire actually would be a way to help Ukraine recover. And I think Europe should probably take the lead on making sure that the funding and the troops and the aircraft and all that stuff that are going to be needed to defend Ukraine, that it comes from them. The United States has done quite a lot. And frankly, we have some big fish to fry here, not only in Asia with China and Taiwan and North Korea, but also on our own borders, for which the amount of money that we spent on Ukraine, that money really from the United States perspective is going to need to go to protecting our own borders and deporting the people, such as the 650,000 criminals and the tens of thousands of terrorists that are floating around the country that they haven't even bothered to find, that President Trump is ramping up the effort to go and get. By the way, car rams into crowd in Germany, killing 2, latest in a series of attacks like that. When will we start seeing something like that start to happen here? That's a question. Literally anybody could run across that border and mean harm to us. And we weren't ready. It's hard to say that we're still ready for it, even though I know President Trump is doing everything he can. And it's this Kristi Noem, the Homeland Secretary, and of course Pam Bondi, the AG. They're on it, and Kash Patel, the FBI director. And we have an all-star team. I see, Laura, you mentioned that President Trump is going to speak to the nation tomorrow night at 6 p.m. And I think that is the State of the Union. So let's all tune into that. Maybe, I don't know if there will be a captive audience tomorrow night. I am going to record one, but I may play it in advance of that event taking place. So let's see. Then you can watch that, and then you can hear more from. I'm going to have Jeff Reynolds on, who is one of the founders of the Captive Audience, moved to Florida, nationally syndicated writer who has some fascinating articles that he's written recently, and we'll get to hear from him. Anyway, I think that is a pretty good roundup of news for tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. I appreciate your patience with me and my little technical problems. But let's make America great again and continue to do the hard work, not only of supporting President Trump and what he's doing, but explaining to our fellow Oregonians what they're getting from Democrats and they're not getting from Democrats, and what they are getting from President Trump and Republicans. Anyway, have a great night.